Physics Bites,
a science podcast in English
by the students of Notre Dame d'Ascension.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Physics Bites, our English language physics podcast from the students of Notre Dame d'Ascension here in Paris. We are back with a couple of our senior level students who are going to be talking to us a little bit about science and science fiction in society and generally how science fiction has evolved over the last century and the role it can play or does play or has played. So I'm going to get them to introduce themselves and then I will introduce my co-host and then we can get started.
Hello, my name is Maud.
So we have Maud.
And my name is Flore.
And we have Flore. And my co-host today is Domitille, who will be, you will hear in another episode when she's going to be talking to us about
dark matter and dark energy.
Yes, we're looking forward to that as well. All right, so the topic of science fiction is a bit different from our usual topics, which are more very science-based and science-centric. But I think there was a lot of interesting stuff that you guys brought up, so maybe we can start with a short summary of how you guys sort of thought about the subject, what you came up with, how you structured it, and what you talked about. So Flore, maybe you want to start?
Yes. So we didn't know where to start to talk about science fiction, but we decided that it was important that everyone knows what is the correct definition of science fiction before we start. So that is what we began to do. Then
So what is science fiction? If we're going to start with a definition.
Well, there are a lot of definitions of science fiction, but there is a great author, Isaac Asimov, that describes science fiction as that branch of literature which deals with the reaction of human beings to changes in science and technology.
Right. So there's humans at the very center of what we consider science fiction. That's something that you guys brought up at various points. The way humans relate to science fiction and the way science fiction relates to humans and human society.
And I think it's important to know that there are two types of science fiction.
Right.
The hard one, which is the one we presented.
Right. You were more focused on hard science fiction, yeah.
Which is the one that uses realistic scientific arguments and extrapolates to make a logical argument based on science. And there is a soft science fiction, which is less using real facts.
Right. So there's one that's more anchored in real science, and the other which is sort of uses non-sciencey science looking like stuff as but it's more focused on the fiction, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, Domitille, I think you have
maybe you can give us examples of hard science fiction.
An example of hard science fiction we mentioned is The Martian.
Right, The Martian by Andy Weir.
Yes.
And why is that considered hard science fiction? Can you give us some reasons why we consider that as hard science fiction?
Because it is a story that comes out of the ordinary, because it talks about a man on Mars. However, it is not impossible to do. We still today haven't discovered a way to go on Mars and live there, but it isn't unrealistic, and it doesn't imply creatures such as unicorns that we prove to not exist.
Right, and also because I think the way that the story unfolds, it requires a lot of actual science. Like the person is saying, okay, what if with our current technology we were stranded on Mars, how or if we could actually like save ourselves, come back, survive. And what would be an example of soft science fiction then?
For soft science fiction, we have a movie that is well known. We have Star Wars,
right,
which of course everyone has seen, but it talks about space travel or other planets where we can live, and it is something that we don't think will ever be possible, and is really far from reality.
Right, and it doesn't really focus on the science, right?
No.
The science is just
it's
a
more
means.
like just fantasy, and it's
right.
It's
probably closer to fantasy than to science fiction, right? Okay. So now that we have the definition underway, where did you guys go from there?
Then we decided to talk about the impact of science fiction on our society, and more precisely by starting with the fact that science feeds science fiction. So like we just said, in art science fiction, there is a lot of science and realistic facts. And then we decided to talk about the fact that science fiction feeds also science, even if it seems impossible. Not impossible, but it's not like the common
right, it's not the easiest thing, but it can actually, science fiction can feed science, right? Okay. What else did you guys talk about when it comes to the interaction between science fiction and society? What are some of the other influences and the interactions between the two?
We mainly talked about the human being,
right?
To focus on society. And also we talked about the fact that science fiction has an impact on society in the part when we say that science fiction is feeding by science, and how we think in our society will feed science fiction.
Okay. What were some of the other topics in your presentation that you guys are like, some of the other aspects of your topic that you guys found interesting that you were talking to us about in class?
Well, we also discovered while we were doing our research in order to prepare well our presentation that as we know, science fiction is a genre that allows its author to have a lot of freedom. However, all the novels of science fiction have a same base, a common base, and
right.
they are all.
And what is that common base?
Well, this is a base of questions that we can resume. So first of all,
the first is the what if question.
Right. So give us an example of what a what if question would be that is used.
Like in Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein. The what if question can be what if we can create a creature like not like a human, but
kind of like a human.
To human.
Right, an artificial human. And what if we do this? Any other what if questions which have been treated maybe, or that could be treated in a science fiction sort of setting?
Well, what if we could live on another planet? That is a question that comes a lot, I think, in science fiction novel. And for instance, we can take
the question of the example of the Martian, right?
Yes,
like,
yes,
what if
Martian.
we ended up on Mars and we had to survive, right? That is a what if question that is not very, how would you say it? It's not very likely to happen on Earth. There are maybe places on Earth which could be similar to how things would be on Mars, but it's a very unique place, right? Which brings us to your second common sort of theme in a lot of science fiction, which was an unfamiliar settings, other worlds, and creating new worlds, right? So let's go quickly through some of the other elements that you guys came up with in your common themes that we have in science fiction. What are the other few?
Then we started. We finished with the structure, which is very common in science fiction.
Even before that, we were thinking about. You said so. You guys, if I'm not mistaken, you had 5 common themes. Like, what are the the what if question, right?
And an unfamiliar setting,
right?
And then we have innovative technology,
right?
That is a thing that is really common in science fiction. Indeed, there are many science fiction stories that include speculative technology that readers have never heard of, for instance,
or that don't exist even.
Or that don't exist. They come from the imagination of the author. For instance, we can take Fahrenheit 451, where there is a hound. It is what is called in the book, and it is a robot that has for mission to go after the humans that don't follow the rules of the society that is described in Fahrenheit 451, but I will let you read if you want to understand better.
I guess in a way that sort of links to the what if question, right? It's like, what if we had infinite energy? What if we had robots that could do all the work for us? What if we had the technology to go to another galaxy, right? So they kind of do superimpose on one another.
And I think this question can also be linked with the one that comes after, which is relatable characters.
Right.
Because in science fiction, all characters do not have to be human. For example, there is robots, and Isaac Asimov, is a lot talking about robots in his novels.
He kind of brought the word into the popular culture, even though the word is not invented by him. And in general, I guess, and this was your fifth point, is that most of good science fiction in a lot of ways comes back to humanity, right? Yes. It has to be something that is anchored in something about ourselves, right? Whether it's our desire to survive, whether it's our desire to come up with new explanations, technologies, etc., what consequences different events can have on our lives, on our society, on our future. Okay. Feel free to intervene anytime you want, Domitil, if you have questions.
Yes, I have a question. You talk about Fahrenheit 451, and where do you think is the limit between a dystopia and a science fiction novel?
Right. Just so we're clear, what do you mean by a dystopian novel?
A novel where the society is different from today's. In Fahrenheit 451, reading is forbidden. And we can talk about the movie 1984.
Or the book.
The book, yes. And can we consider this book as a science fiction novel or more dystopian one?
Right, that's a good question because, so to be clear, 1984 was not written in 1984. It was written way before, many decades before. So in a ways, it was looking forward to the future to see how would it be if it was one of those what if questions, right? Yes. In a way. I think most literary circles, we considered 1984 as a work of science fiction for its time.
Well, as a matter of fact, 1984 is at the same time a dystopian novel and a science fiction novel.
Right.
And I think that the limit between those two genres is kind of blurry. What I want to say is that in fact, there are a lot of hard science fiction that can be considered dystopias because since they are not far from reality, there is always that idea that we can connect with them. But science fiction can also take place today, whereas dystopian always take place in a future more or less close to our present.
It could be. It depends. I mean, for example, you guys I think mentioned it even at some point that there's a lot of science fiction today is focused on the consequences of climate change. Yes. That most of them end up being quite dystopic just because of what we're doing with the environment. Many of them are in the immediate future, but we could also wonder about, okay, what would it be if because of climate change we had to leave the planet or something like that, or how it would be the planet in 400 years. So I think it depends on what not the goal of the writer is, but kind of what the goal of the writer is, right? If in the end it is an exploration of the human condition.
Science fiction can makes us think about the future of our humanity, and that's the link with society.
Right. At least, I mean, if you read Asimov, his stories take place thousands of years in the future, and still they are, in a lot of ways, a reflection on the human condition. The same with a lot of other stuff from Arthur C. Clarke, so it doesn't have to be. They can be one or the other or both. Depends on what the work of science fiction is. All right, so let's move on because you guys did have a lot of stuff and we didn't get to hear everything during the presentation. What are some of the common themes that sort of come back often? Which found a lot of popularity.
So one common theme which comes back a lot is extraterrestrial life.
Right, first encounters with another intelligence that is not a human one.
Yes.
Like the kind that your classmates, Victoire and Suzanne, were talking about last week, they were hoping to find. So they're doing the science and you're talking about, okay, let's see if their science works. What are we going to do with that? So what are some examples of these sort of encounters with extraterrestrial intelligence or life in science fiction?
Well, I read the book and Maud saw the movie, but about 201 Space Odyssey.
2001.
2001 Space Odyssey, which is at the same time a book and a movie. It was written in parallel.
Yeah.
Those two things. It is a book in which there is meeting with extraterrestrial life, but in that book it doesn't enlighten the role of aliens, because they are described as not friendly, and there are a bit of an enemy for the heroes, but it's only one in a million examples of these books.
There is also E.T., which is an example, the basic example that everyone knows about extraterrestrial life.
Right. Now, I guess that would be less hard science fiction than maybe some of the other examples. Certainly less than 2001, but it is a question about how could it be if there is some sort of an encounter with an extraterrestrial life. Like you mentioned already, there's lots of recurring things around like new technologies that don't exist, and
like
asking
robots.
Right, robots, and the questioning about how humans would react, how human society could change with these sort of very paradigm shifting technologies. Something that maybe was very speculative until recently. Now we're faced with this question of the first primitive forms of artificial intelligence, and in a lot of ways, maybe the fact that science fiction has made us think about that in advance, now that the actual technology starts arriving, it might help us be better armed and prepared to deal with it in a proper way. You also talked about alternative worlds or realities, and outer space is a very common theme, right?
Yes, of course.
So it's all stuff that we can't do, but we want to do usually. Yeah, Dimitri, you have a
Maybe to
question?
come back on extraterrestrial life, is there any books that suggest solutions to maybe find life in space?
Or that you guys know of that are interesting in terms of the contact between humans and an extraterrestrial sort of intelligence?
Well, maybe there is the movie Dune, which doesn't exactly talks about extraterrestrial life, but it talks about a world in which there are many houses called the Great Houses, and in those houses there are different civilizations, and some of them are humans, others are called the Fremen, and they look like human, but they
have slight differences in some cases.
Yes, they don't live the same way, and so that is one book where there is once again a meeting in extraterrestrial, between aliens and humans.
Or at least non-human
Yes.
non-human life. Okay.
But I don't know if there are a lot of books that talks about really how to discover the aliens, because even us don't know how. So I think that would be a book which goes far away from the reality, and maybe people wouldn't understand that.
Thank you.
I don't know if any of you guys saw the movie that came out a few years ago, which was called, in French we called it Premier Contact. In English we call it No. That was a very interesting speculation on a form of extraterrestrial life, which is very, very different. And a good part of the movie was on the problems of communication that we might have with something that is so different. They don't even have the same notion of time as us. And so, but that was very good. It's again another good example of science fiction, which is speculation, but also in the end is a reflection on the human condition. So maybe we can move on to one of the things that was interesting in your talk about the impact that science fiction can have and has had on our societies. Do you guys want to maybe go over some of the stuff that you guys found in your research?
Yes, but we found that science fiction reveals a number of challenges that our societies will have to face in the future. And some of them are particularly present today, like the climate changing, the impact of biotechnology applications on human being, such as increased cognitive capacity. And Yes.
Or one of the what example of that is one of the earliest works of science fiction, Brave New World, is something that's talking about sort of like maybe less space and lasers and robots and more about sort of the genetics and like, you know, manipulating the nature of humanity and the effects it can have on society. Okay, what else? Did you guys
So
find,
all these questions make us think about the society we will have to face, like I just said, and I think that's what in a way feeds. That's what in a way feeds science.
Mm-hmm.
Like science fiction feeds science because it make us think about the future that is possible for us.
But also we can say that science fiction fits science because, as we said, it's a genre that allows the author to have a lot of freedom, and therefore the imagination is an important driver of innovation. Therefore, when writing a novel of science fiction, you have to think about how you want to make it plausible, because if not, you will not get the attention of the reader as much as if the reader himself can project in the book, and that is something really important. And those imaginatives technology or just mentalities or ways of doing things can inspire us as we speak nowadays. For instance, scientists can find inspiration in some science fiction novel.
And about that, I think there is an example. It's a project that illustrates perfectly what Flore just said. It's the European Space Agency that launched the project called Innovative Technologies from Science Fiction for Space Applications. So basically, this project was gathering a lot of scientists, and they picked innovative technologies from science fiction's books, and they tried to
try and create it,
yes,
or see if it's doable, just something that we can actually create or research into. So again, there's a lot of what in French we would call anticipation, in terms of like, you know, a lot of the technology that Asimov comes up with in his books in the 1940s and 50s and 60s, or stuff that has come around only recently, whether it's linked to robotics or, like you guys mentioned, like cyborgs, bionic limbs, and stuff like this. There was stuff that was thought of before it actually was created. And so it's not necessarily easy to say if somebody thinking of that made some scientists say, like, can we do this or not? Sure. Or at least we know that it prepared us to think about these questions. Well, the way you guys make it sound, it seems like this, like the perfect genre of literature, right? This is, it can only bring us good. No, are there any? You talked about limitations as well, no? And some like.
Yes, there are also some limits of science fiction, and we can see the term limits as a synonym of defaults or flaws of science fiction.
But we can also see this term of limits like more or less what will limit the development of science fiction itself, like in the future.
Explain that a little bit.
So I think we made researches, and we found that some scientists thought that if we are trying to classify science fiction too much in like many categories, this will limit the development of science fiction in the future, because there will be
restrictions.
Yes, there will be restrictions, and so authors may not think about innovative things like they did before.
So basically, by thinking about stuff, we sort of get stuck thinking about only that sort of a thing instead of thinking about new.
Yes.
But I think that's okay. That's interesting. You talked about not trying to fit everything into boxes. What do you mean by that?
so not trying to classify too much science fiction.
In that sense, the
In that
boxes
sense,
being the different
yes.
classifications.
Yes.
Okay. So I think we've gone over most of what you guys talked about in your presentation. Is there any one aspect that you want to develop a bit more, or you wanted to talk about? Maybe stuff that we didn't have time to go over in class?
Maybe we can talk about the fact that the limits can be seen too as a synonym of disadvantages.
Okay. So what are some disadvantages of this sort of literature thing?
The first, and I think the most obvious disadvantage that comes with science fiction is the fact that as it is mentioned, in its name, there is a part of fiction in science fiction, and that part, since it is only decided by the author, can sometimes take the big majority of the book, and whereas some people like to read and to project themselves in their readings, they like to go over relatable characters, as we said before. If it is too far from reality, they won't like it because they can't associate themselves with the heroes.
So you're saying that a lot of people have difficulty getting into science fiction just because the science part is kind of
it can be a limit.
It can be a limit.
Yes.
It could be a barrier, or just that the world that's being described, the conditions, the stuff are too far-fetched, and they have trouble identifying with it, and if they don't identify with it, then they're having a hard time getting interested by it.
Yes.
Okay. I have a question, because I think there's a cultural aspect also to maybe science fiction. Did you guys do a lot of science fiction when you're going through your middle school and early high school? I think there's very little in your, because you've done a lot of like French and like literary studies. You have to do this, right? There's very little science fiction in there, right?
Yes.
Personally, I studied many films of science fiction, but I think the most of the one we saw were soft science fiction mostly. But there was like La Planète des Singes, I don't know how.
Right, the Planet of the Apes.
Yes, and Retour vers le futur, but it's Back to the Future. It's most.
It's more fiction than science, right?
It's not very.
But in terms of like actually studying it in a literary way, like you would do most of the French books and like
But I read Brave New World for my HLP class.
Right, but that's an option that you had last year, and it's not. So it's not something that like all 14-year-olds would go through studying. I think you do have a bit of a science fiction in middle school.
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Okay, in which age group did you do this?
In 4e.
Okay, so that would be equivalent of grade 8, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. But in general, I get the impression that science fiction has not as much popularity in France, or at least traditionally, as it does in a place like North America. Any ideas why that is? It's also not been a form of literature that has been very highly regarded until, I guess, more recently, right? Compared to actual fiction. Do you guys have any insight into that?
I don't have any. I'm not sure, but I think it could be because science fiction can lead students, for example, to entertain unrealistic expectations for the future, and maybe they could feel disappointed when they see that this doesn't happen.
Well, we all were disappointed when we saw Back to the Future, and in 2015 we still didn't have those hoverboards, right?
Yes.
I wonder also if it's not because most science fiction writers come from the science part and not so much from the literary side. And I think in France there's not a high standard, but there's maybe a bit of snobism towards the literary side of things. So if it's not well written, it's not considered real literature.
I think that's why we don't study that much of science fiction. It's also because French teachers want us to read well-written books, and they want
more
us
classics.
to like Shakespeare and Molière. So when we come to read science fiction, which are also of great authors such as Isaac Asimov
but we're not great writers when it comes to, like, if you compare that to Victor Hugo, it's not the same thing, right?
Exactly. So I think that
it's psychological.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it's changing. Maybe it will change soon. Do you guys have parents who read science fiction at all, or no? No? Flore is
My
giving me a
father
heads up.
reads a lot of science fiction.
So do you have some science fiction books at home?
Yes, I have. I didn't read them, but they are in my home, and maybe one day I will. But there are really big books,
Yeah.
so they don't.
You have trouble motivating
Yeah.
yourself to get into such a big project? Do you guys have science fiction at home a bit? Do parents...
Same as Flore, my father
Yeah.
reads science fiction, but
Are you saying it's more of a guy thing than a...
No.
Than a...
it can be. I don't know.
All right. Okay. Well, I think we've gone over through most of the topics you guys brought up. I thought it was a... I don't know. I think, Domitille, you agree with me. It was a pretty interesting
Yes.
topic. It's very different from the
Very
usual
much.
topics that we would do, and you guys did a really good job. Clearly, you did a lot of work. I think it's difficult to do a presentation on science fiction and read like 5-6 books, just because you have so much to do this year with the end of year exams and going into your higher studies next year. But it was a pretty good thing. Any final thoughts? Maybe what did you think of your topic? Did you regret taking it? Was it difficult? What did you find most interesting in your researchers? Unexpected?
I think that what was scary about this topic at the beginning was that we didn't know how to
Right.
to talk about it in
Very
what way.
open-ended
Yes,
in a way,
it's
right? Just
very
like-
large, and it was hard to find access.
Like a starting point.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And Flore, did you have any particular thoughts on it? Or did you find it interesting, difficult?
It was really interesting. In fact, I already liked science fiction before I started the presentation my research to do the presentation,
Yeah.
but I learned a lot of things.
Mhm.
Like, for instance, I had the idea that science only fed science fiction and not the other
The
way
other way around.
around. But I learned a lot of things, and I would recommend to people to read science fiction because it's a source of knowledge.
All right. It's always good to end with a little bit of advertisement for the topic. Domitille, what did you find interesting about the topic as being on the other side in the audience? Did you
Well,
what did you think of the presentation of the topic?
I thought it was really interesting to hear about like the definition and the two types of science fiction, because I didn't know that there were two types
Yeah.
of science fictions, and they talk about a lot of examples, and it was really easy to relate
Right.
to these examples. So I think it was a really
So maybe you learned something that you didn't know. Maybe you might one day even pick up a big science fiction book and read it, despite the fact that it
maybe.
maybe. All right. So, well, Flore and Maud, thank you very much for this presentation on the topic. It was a really, really interesting topic. You guys did a really good job. Thank you to Domitille, my co-host this episode. We'll hear her talk about other stuff later on, and we'll be back very soon next time with a new topic. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
So, that is Physics Bites for this week. We hope that you enjoyed the episode. Tell us what you thought about the topic in the comments section. If you did enjoy the show, then subscribe to our podcast, tell all your friends about it, and leave us 5 stars. And most importantly, come back soon for a brand new episode.